Yo, how you going everyone? Welcome to Project V354. This is intro video for the build that I have been embarking on for the last couple of years. Actually, it's been a bit of a slow one, but there's reasons for that. Yeah, this is the new build. So this is something that has been being built in my mind for like the last 12 years or so, and that I wasn't ever sure if it would ever kind of happen, with the way drifting has been particularly in South Australia for a long time. However, with the introduction of the bend and the semi-purpose built track that obviously we now have, but going back a few years when that was first getting ready to sort of be launched and opening up, that got me inspired. I had a 34 four-door at the time that was it was just a streeter, but it essentially had all the bits to allow me to get out there and get involved. So from the first time the bend was open, first event, track day, I took the 34 out. It was the first time I'd been out on track and involved in the drift scene again here in SA for a very long time. And I was very pleasantly surprised to see that things were pretty different to what I remember anyway. As in just the scene itself, obviously a lot of the people are very different because things have changed over that time. I'm pretty old now, considering in comparison to a lot of the dudes out there, but that's cool, that's all right. But yeah, I was really happy to see that the vibe was fucking unreal. The driving standard, bananas, everything was killer. The sport obviously is killer on its own. So I started driving, pretty much attended every event that's been at the bend in that time since, and I really started getting back into it. And pretty soon after getting back into it, I think it was the end of 2018 that it opened up, I decided that the whole scene, everything was in a place where I'm like, yeah, I want to build another proper car, and so that was what kind of inspired this build to actually come to life and be more than just an idea in my head. Anyway, getting back to the car, I chose a V35 chassis, V35 Skyline, obviously. I know that's a little bit of a questionable, depending on the person. Not everyone loves them. They stepped away from what most of us know as the Skylines of the times up until then, and went to the NAV6 and a very different platform. Now that did leave a lot to be desired in a lot of ways. I won't deny. Sorry, but I owned one. My wife and I had one as a bit of a daily, like nearly 10 years ago now, or more than 10 years ago, and it was a basic car, manual one, had the Brembos and stuff, coilovers, a few basic bits. Right back then, so that car inspired me for this build now, even though I wasn't driving, really competing or anything at the time. Owning that car and living in the hills where I do and driving it around, really, that car inspired me to, and planted the seed with the idea that if I ever got to a point in life where I was going to build another like serious track car, competition car, that it was going to be one of these, because of the platform itself. The engine, yes, very dull, not exciting at all, but as you know, with competition drift cars, they're often not running the motors that they would normally have in them, or they're very far from standard. So overlooking the motor altogether, just looking at the actual car, the chassis, the way it sat on the road, the size, the layout, all of those things I personally loved. And like I said, that car was what inspired me to, if I ever got to that point of building another car, it was going to be one of them. So that's what has been going on in my head. All the parts and engine combinations and all those different things have been working out in my head over all the years, and that did actually change not long before we started the build. I had originally always planned to go with a 2J, just because 2J things, we all know them, love them, reliable, very capable, all of the things just made sense. I'm someone who likes to keep things pretty simple in terms of engine setups where reliability is key. I think it's, I assume, I've never had one, but I assume it's a whole bunch of fun to have a shitload of power and all the killer wasps in the world. But obviously that comes at a price, and I'm not someone who really gets off on fixing and working on cars all the fucking time. So I'm not interested in that. I would rather have something that does the job, still makes the power, ideally at least a reasonable amount, but that is just going to go and be reliable, not break down, or nothing outside of the usual shit that you kind of can't avoid. So it was always going to be 2J, but like I said, that changed recently. I got probably, not at the time I wouldn't say inspired, but the seed was planted a little while ago from a good mate of mine who is into his Euro stuff. When I told him that we were about to start it, he planted the seed of why don't I use a BMW motor in the N54, which most of you probably fucking having a bit of a laugh right now, and I did the same thing. Thought, no, you're gonna be fucking kidding me. But I trust him, and so I let him say his bits, sort of try and sell it on me. Then I went and did a bunch of research and started really seriously looking into it, because he made a few good points. And it got to the point where I was like, you know what, this is actually a pretty good idea. And combined with a few other things, like the fact that 2Js aren't heaps easy to come by these days, they're certainly not cheap. And let's face it, they're 20 years old or more now, versus the motor that we've ended up deciding on, the N54, being nearly 10 years newer. Same on paper. It's an inline from factory twin turbo 3 litre 6-cylinder motor. So on paper it would seem to be a competitor for the 2J for sure. Obviously there's a lot more to it than just what's written on paper, but being that it was BMW's first production turbocharged mass-produced 6-cylinder, they went a little bit overboard, and for I guess robustness and endurability and stuff, so they forged the bottom end and put quite a few things in place that makes the actual motor itself, the rotating assembly, very, very capable and very, very tough. A lot of people are going to jump on and piss and moan about reliability and everything breaks, and they're renowned for having all these issues, which to some degree is true and is fair. But if you look into it, all of those issues are the accessories, the stuff that's bolted to the motor, whether it's high pressure fuel pumps through to injectors through to a whole bunch of other shit. Basically anything that's been attached to the motor afterwards. The actual engines themselves are very, very capable. A lot of guys overseas who run 600-700 horsepower wheels all day, every day, unopened factory motors with just bolt-on bits, and as long as they're maintained, they seem to be solid as. So, decided to go down that route. Plus, I really wanted to do something a bit different with this car. So, I've been, most of you would know, I've been drifting for a very long time, coming up to nearly 20 years. Back in the day when drifting was first on the scene in Australia, I'm old enough that I was amongst kind of some of the few who jumped on board not long after the people like Danny Verhumis and co started and really introduced it to us here in Australia. And back then, your S13s or your S and R chassis stuff made perfect sense. It was super cheap at the time, easy to get heaps of them, import them straight out of Japan, perfect platforms, all made sense in literally in every aspect. Things have changed, and that's no longer the case. They're still a really good platform, obviously, but we're living in times now where they're not cheap, as all of you probably already know, it's starting to get hard to get parts for, and at the end of the day, like, they're old, and whilst they were from an era, and obviously up until the, you know, sort of finished around S15s, R34s, that kind of era, that 2000 era, there was a bit of a lull there where performance rear-wheel drive cars really kind of, more Japanese stuff really sort of dropped off. And the V35 wasn't necessarily, didn't fill that void, didn't tick the same boxes. Platform-wise, I think they're onto it, and I think it is. I mean, I've been driving a 34 for the last few years, and I do think the 35 is a step up in the evolution in terms of the chassis. So yeah, that was another thing that to take into account. Newer, more modern, better tech, the R&D, all of those things. And then take the fact that at the moment they're actually cheap, pretty readily available, heaps easier to get bits and pieces for, and something different. I wanted to do something different. By the time this car gets out on the track, yes, there will be a couple out there already, but they've been, for the most part, they've been pretty sort of street oriented, kind of, you know, very basic cars that people have just started using to learn and to thrash in, which is killer. But that so far there hasn't really been a proper serious one built, which is what I'm trying to do here and kind of make this one the first one. I also like the fact that they didn't actually need shitloads of modifications. I mean, obviously you upgrade, replace most bits, but the car itself didn't need any major structural changes. You don't need to do anything crazy with them. It's literally stripped back for weight purposes, and just get rid of all the shit that you don't need. So stripped right back to a bare shell, get a proper cage put in it, and then from there just put the thing back together for the most part as it already would have been. Some bits upgraded, some bits tweaked, but essentially the rear end is still as it would be. That's partially a lie. It's got a V36 rear end in it, but essentially that's mostly the same anyway. I chose to go for 36 rear end because the 35s and the 350s have an alloy rear cradle, which is known to be a little bit weak, and I just didn't want to deal with shit with this car. This is one of those builds where I wanted to just do it right, do it once, and not have to worry about it anymore. So the V36s, they went back to steel subframe, still bolt straight up all in the same spot. It is a little bit wider, so, but the increased track on something like this is only a bonus anyway, because it's going to be wide bodied and all that shit. So it's got a V36 rear end in it, but shafts and arms and diff and all of that stuff is pretty standard. I mean, obviously the diff center has been swapped out for a mechanical, adjustable arms put in, and obviously coilovers. So Shopworks coilovers all around. But yeah, no major changes, no having to fab shit up and completely redesign anything. It's just use it all as it is. In the front end, sort of similar story, a little bit different. Anyone who's driven one of these knows that they've got the turning circle of like fucking Greyhound bus. It's rap shit. So steering was always going to be something that needed a lot of work, and obviously for a drift car, lock is pretty bloody important. So at the time of the build, I didn't have the option of supporting local and using the cost of stuff because he hasn't got anything for these yet. So I went with a company FDF from, I think they're based out of Canada, who do all their own stuff in-house, but have got a lot of experience with 35s and 350s and that whole Z sort of chassis and V chassis stuff. Well priced, really good quality, just ticked all the boxes. So I've splurged and gone with all the FDF full front end, so that's literally replacing everything from hubs to uprights to control arms and the whole kit and caboodle. So that's in the front. The Akabono brakes up front, which again they're just Nissan brakes, but just from a later model, bigger upgrade and the issue of the motor, which is again just something different. I'm trying to not push the envelope, but just, you know, inspire maybe people to think outside the box a little bit. We as drifters, we tend to get stuck in what we know and what is just, you know, there's half a dozen chassis and half a dozen motors that everyone seems to choose from, and it's just in every car out there is one combination of, you know, those things. And I think there's more to it than that, and we can do more, and there are more options, and, you know, we can change things up a little bit without necessarily just adding more combos and V8s. So that's what I'm trying to do. That's what the goal is with this car. So to summarise, wanted to do something a little bit different, both chassis and engine wise. Still needs to work, obviously. It needs to be reliable, because that's just how I roll, and pretty sort of hassle free. So that's where I've gone with this car. The goal is to make 450 kilowatts at the wheels, which is, I don't know, some of you will say that's not that much. It'll be the most high powered car I've personally ever driven, but I've always been in relatively low powered cars. But it's within the threshold where I want it to be, where it should be more than enough to do everything I need it to do. It'll be quick, it'll fry tyres, it'll keep up with anyone I need to keep up with, but it's not going to be pushing and stressing anything in the car to the sort of points where shit should fail. So the whole idea of this car is, you know, build something that'll handle 900 horsepower all day every day, and then only ask it to make, well, maybe not 8 or 9, 800 horsepower, and then ask it to make between 5 and 6, so that it's only ever really working in that pretty safe kind of, you know, 70-80% range, and keep it in its efficiency and shit. Obviously still want things to work, but where it's just not being stressed too hard. So that's the goal, that's the plan, and we will see how we go from here. This was basically, like I said, just a real quick video, an intro to explain. It's obviously just me talking shit, but most of you will know I do that a bit. But yeah, give you a quick look at it while I'm here, and videos from here on should get more into the actual car itself. We'll go over one time when it's on the hoist. I'll be able to show you everything underneath and all of that, and the engine side of things is about to start coming together now and be fitted, and then shit starts to get fun. So probably, I don't know, a small handful of videos. I've already got an album up of photos and stuff that I've been documenting the whole build so far, but I did want to do some video stuff. So this is the first crack at that, so we'll see how we go. Cheers for tuning in. I hope it didn't bore you, and we will see how the thing goes as we tick along with the project.